Hello and welcome to Race to 2020, your podcast for all things American election, brought to you by Sky News Australia. I'm James Morrow, opinion editor of the Daily Telegraph and co-host of Outsiders. I'm here with
Jack Houghton from Sky News Australia.
And we are here with some breaking news this morning, all about John Bolton, the National Security Advisor to the President, is now out of the White House.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of speculation about who actually made the decision, because I noticed that John Bolton was on Twitter saying, well, I actually offered to resign last night, but President Trump has come forward saying that he requested it. Obviously, there's been a little bit of a disagreement on their approach to foreign policy.
Yeah.
Trump's been a little bit more tempered. Bolton really kind of wants to ramp up.
Yeah, I mean, look, so first of all, as we always see with every one of these sort of White House departures, there's always that sort of chaotic thing, and it's always kind of like the, no, you didn't dump me, I dumped you sort of thing, you know? It's like, these are always just the worst
We're watching a breakup.
Yeah, it's the worst breakups ever. So John Bolton, the very hawkish neoconservative national security advisor, the thing that I find really is out the door, and the thing that I find really interesting about this, Jack, is the way suddenly, now if you go back, I looked at some of the clips this morning about when John Bolton was appointed National Security Advisor, and basically the theme of it was, we all gonna die. And it was John Bolton is going to push an already unstable, warmongering Donald Trump, into some sort of global conflagration. Of course, this is a total misread of the situation, and while John Bolton always has been very neoconservative, very hawkish, very pro-American intervention, all of these pundits have completely misread, I think, Trump foreign policy, and you have to give, I think, Donald Trump some credit that over the last 3 years he has presided over what has been a fairly stable world order. There's not been, a mass conflagration in the Middle East like we had with Syria. There hasn't been one of these sort of spring-turned-winter type of moments, like we had with the Arab Spring. We have seen Russian adventurism curbed and no military interventions into foreign or next-door neighbors. So on all of those levels, I think you have to say that the world order has been stable with Trump. I think my suspicion
but was that despite Bolton pressuring Trump?
Yeah, well, my suspicion is that with tensions ramping up around Iran and what's happening in the Gulf over there, with seizure of these oil tankers and Iranian adventurism, I suspect that what happened was that Bolton was making a very strong case for some sort of military play that Trump didn't want. Now, Trump doesn't want this for two reasons. I think, number one, he knows that getting involved in some sort of conflict, big conflict, not just, little isolated things. There have been some isolated interventions and activities, that's all to be expected, would be deadly to his 2020 presidential ambitions, because he came into office on the promise of, no more endless, stupid, long, expensive, pointless conflicts. And so to get into something like that would be, I think, politically unwise. But I think also, Jack, there's another thing that's happening, too, is that Trump knows that he's not a military tactician, and he knows that as soon as he gets involved in that sort of conflict, he's letting his opponents define, quite literally, the battle space. That's why he's been very assertive in other fronts. So we see the trade war with China, which is actually far more than just a trade war, has really been, I think, something that's played much more to his strengths and has really damaged, I think, the Chinese regime quite a bit, but without firing a shot, which is actually, in a way, playing the Chinese at their own game.
Yeah, well, he is a dealer. He's a wheeler and dealer, and this is how he came into office. And he had the strategy of America first as opposed to America everywhere. It's a little slogan you might see in the wake of this. Yeah. But we saw this probably demonstrated most publicly when Bolton was very against the North Korea meeting.
Yeah.
And some stories, they did have anonymous sources, but some stories that were published at the time before that meeting had that Bolton was advocating for, mini strikes in both North Korea and in Iran.
Yeah.
Trump ignored that, and he famously said that he was the one tempering Bolton, which is quite hilarious. And he went and did this meeting with North Korea, and I think fairly positive reaction to that, because
Yeah, I mean, look, up to a point, because
Up
North
to
Korea
a point,
is still
you don't want
testing
to
its missiles,
validate a
still,
dictatorship.
You don't want to validate,
but at least they're talking.
But at least they're talking, and and some would say, well, but North Korea is still firing off missiles, it's still developing its nuclear program. But
so
Trump,
is Iran.
Iran is still, but Trump still, Trump I think believes that there's nothing that can't ultimately be solved face to face by relationships. I mean, that's the world that he comes from, out of New York. The problem with the Bolton type of strategy is that ultimately what that calls for is a United States that is exerting maximum pressure everywhere, which is impossible to sustain, and eventually, it collapses in on itself. So both approaches, I think, are, have their strengths and their weaknesses, but I think that, in the long run, it would be better to see conflict managed in other arenas than just sort of kinetic military conflict. And I think we saw this with the we saw Trump's instincts at play with his attempt to have a meeting with the Taliban at Camp David, which blew up this week. There was this plan that he was going to have these Taliban leaders come in, make a deal with them. Ultimately, though, you can't really deal with the Taliban because they're so, they're so. There was a very good analysis of this in the Australian newspaper the other day about this, how their entire code is so irascibly feudal that there's simply almost no way to deal with them. But the idea was, again, that if there was a way that we could reduce American presence in Afghanistan, then that might be a good thing as well, because that's exactly what he came to office predicated on doing. We've had a conflict in Afghanistan that's now over 18 years old. You can buy it a beer.
What do you think about the way that the international media, and by that I mean their domestic media, has covered the Camp David situation?
Well, I think actually there's an interesting thing. I want to talk about more than just the Camp David thing, but we are now actually in this scenario where not just with Camp David, but also with John Bolton, where we see all external conflicts, all external enemies, all external actions now through the media framed entirely in the context of domestic politics. That's really, really dangerous, actually. And we also see this right now in Australia because, we have this controversy over an MP who seems to have these links to China, Gladys Liu, and that is, now being interpreted this morning in Australia through the prism of, which side of politics does it hurt? When in fact both sides of politics have this problem. And my concern is that ultimately both sides of politics and start playing points off each other. That means that the West's external enemies, Australia's external enemies, the United States' external enemies, China, the Taliban, Iran, whomever, can, without much sophistication needed, play us off these breaks, and set everything up in terms of just, left-right politics. And that means that we lose the ability to focus on actually the greater problem, which is, an Iran that wants to be the dominant player in the Middle East, a China that wants to take over the Pacific, and so on.
Yeah, well, I mean, particularly with the Strait of Hormuz, the main issue there is that if America did act, and so say what happens is these intelligence operatives, they might have a list of like 10 or 15, probably even larger, of priority targets. Yeah. Right? Targets that if they were going to go into, they would take these targets out first, and it would be ports and certain key infrastructure targets. When I was in Israel, some of the briefings they gave us were that if America was to do that, then you would have Hezbollah firing 100,000 missiles across at Israel. Yep. So the ramifications of even a tiny little escalation of that conflict can be completely devastating for a lot of people. And it's all very well for Bolton to say this may have, increase our reach and increase the pressure and everything, but America has always struggled with this about the collateral fallout with their actions. Yeah. So I think Trump's been very clever here. It's you've got to de-escalate. And look, they need to keep this. They need to keep this particular thoroughfare open. Yeah. And they need to do everything. We've sent a warship there. Yeah. Australia are getting involved. Yeah. But that's more about having things there to de-escalate as opposed to ramping up the conflict. And it seems like it was in complete contradiction to the advice he's getting from his national security advisor. So he probably had to go. They probably had to be on the same page.
I think so, too. And I think, everybody, the take on Trump is that he's a moron, that he's an idiot, he's a blustering fool. Actually, you would have to look at the two approaches and say that Trump is actually working on a more calibrated, multivalent multi sort of battle space kind of way of looking at things. So seeing that, it's not just about actual military things, firing missiles, taking territory, blowing stuff up, and saying "ha," but actually, working in cyberspace, working with finance. I think it's an interesting difference. Yeah,
but being able to push back against somebody who is as distinguished as Bolton.
Yeah.
For example,
I was surprised, actually. To be honest, I was surprised that he brought Bolton in the first place.
Right, why is that?
Well, because Bolton, as I say, he was a neoconservative of that sort of George W. Bush era, Iraq era, all of that. And that was exactly all the stuff that Trump ran against. So I was surprised even that he brought him in the first place.
I wonder if a deal was done, to appease that particular side. He'd run on this platform of very isolationist America, and perhaps they were saying to balance out that isolationist
but
attitude.
I don't think that Trump necessarily plays that sort of idea that you've got to balance an office with different people from different factions. I don't think he sees it in that sort of way.
Right.
But anyway, I want to move on though, because while Trump is dealing with challenges all around the world, there's also this question of Republicans, I think, kind of, to be honest, laughably, some of them trying to challenge Trump for the 2020 nomination.
Yeah, well, I mean, this the latest fellow to come forward, Mark Sanford. Tell me a little bit about him. He's got a little bit of a checkered history in terms of morality, infidelity.
It's pretty funny, actually. Former South Carolina Governor Mark Sanford is the latest. There's now 3 candidates who are all coming out.
Who are they again? There's Joe Walsh.
So there's Joe Walsh, who is from Illinois.
Yep.
There is Mark Sanford, and then there's Bill Weld, who is a former governor of Massachusetts.
Right.
So it's just funny because you have this whole thing. There are these sort of hashtag Never Trump Republicans who say Donald Trump is this great outrage. He doesn't represent true Republican values. He doesn't, he's this thrice divorced, tacky, disgusting, filthy property developer whose, politics are all over the shop and everything like that. But
he acts like a leftist.
Well, yeah. Well, so this is the really funny thing though. Mark Sanford had a really bizarre scandal in his personal life some years back when he was governor of South Carolina. He had this whole thing where he said, I'm going to go off and I'm going to hike the Appalachian Trail for 15 days. The Appalachian Trail is one of these sort of nature walks. It's big, it's long, it's huge. Don't know why anybody would want to do that when there's not hotels and places to plug in your hairdryer, but what can you do? Different strokes. Turns out, though, he was off down in Buenos Aires with his lover, not his wife, having some massively Byzantine, complicated affair. They found him down there, and it was a whole big mess. You've also got Joe Walsh from Illinois, another guy with all these sort of checkered personal things in his past. He was once sued for over $100,000 in back child support by his ex-wife. You've got Bill Weld, who is a pot legalization, pro-legalize everything libertarian. And these are the people, though, I find really hilarious, Jack. You've got all these people who are saying, we need somebody to stand up for Republican family values. And you've got a pot legalizer, a guy who's behind on his child support, and somebody who went off to Argentina with his lover while he was married to another woman. All of them saying, hey, Donald Trump, we need to get rid of this guy.
The most hilarious thing about this is if you read how the New York Times is covering these challenges, and I know particularly with Mark Sanford, they're saying this is the greatest threat to Donald Trump. And it's
so hilarious.
It's like, I mean, percentage-wise, what percentage chance do you think that they would have of dethroning a sitting president?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I don't think it's ever happened before. Somebody out there, correct me if I'm wrong, listeners. If a sitting president has ever been successfully challenged for a second term nomination,
you can see the New York Times, they're salivating at the prospect. They're just like, please.
We need something. We need something to, why are these people keep voting for Trump? He's, yeah.
So they actually touched on his infidelity, and I think they were like, well, it's really the least scandalous of all scandals it's ever really been, because really all he really did was fall in love. I just find that if I'm ever in an infidelity scandal, I'm just going to use that line. But really, I just fell in love.
Well, Jack, the heart wants what the heart wants.
Are you going to stand in the way of love?
Hey, hashtag love wins, right?
Hashtag love trumps Trump.
Love trumps Trump. Love trumps hate. So I think this is all kind of funny because especially now that you've got 3 state Republican organizations in Kansas, in Nevada, and somewhere else. Where else? South Carolina, I think, have all said we are not even going to bother holding a Republican policy primary because Trump's the guy, and no one's going to wind up beating him. So let's just not even waste the money. And in fact, actually, what's interesting now is I'm hearing reports from on the ground that the Trump strategy now is going to be flipping blue states red. So he's going to be apparently like New Mexico right now. He's got a lot of ground game already started to pour into New Mexico, like a new campaign director, and the big things there are going to be border control and China. These are going to be the big things that we're going to see coming out of Trump on these state-by-state campaigns.
How do you think he's going to go flipping these states? It's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, but hang on. Think about, those 4 key states in the middle of the United States that he flipped 3 years ago. And really the way that he did that, you had the Hillary Clinton machine, which was run largely by a sort of a high-tech, data-driven operation run by Robbie Mook, which, of course, failed miserably and didn't see any of the things that were coming. And then you just had simply Trump crashing through with this incredible ground game. And I mean, those last 3 months of the campaign, 2 months of the campaign, Trump was doing 2, 3, 4 events a day in these states, just going from place to place to place to place to place, getting in front of people, speaking to them, and Hillary Clinton wasn't. And so, really, like, I'm a real traditionalist about this sort of thing. I'm a real traditionalist about a lot of things. But, on this, I think that that it's a ground game thing always beats the sort of, we've got this data-driven thing, we've got databases, we've got this. All of that stuff's important, and you got to know this sort of thing. But people wind up becoming so divorced from what their reality is because they see everything through a screen, and they don't wind up seeing it through, actually like going out and seeing it with their own eyes.
Yeah, I mean, candidates who knock on the doors themselves and knock on the most doors, they tend to build that rapport directly.
And then,
this is like a broader way of doing that.
And, he speaks to 10,000 people. They all go off and say, I saw Trump, and they say, what do you think? And, and the thing is, too, is that the more Trump speaks, this is especially important for Trump because he is so misreported in the press. So, during that whole campaign period, I was listening to Trump's speeches and his rallies constantly. And then I was listening to the news, whether the ABC News here in Australia and reading the New York Times and the Washington Post and watching the news media out of the United States. And the gap, the disconnect between what was being said by the so-called mainstream media and what Trump was saying was just opened up wider and wider and wider. So, they're saying this guy is a dope, he's unsophisticated, and then I've just listened to him give a 1-hour press conference giving, fairly detailed, sophisticated answers and thoughtful answers about a range of questions. So,
I've got to say he was like this last night when he did his big rally in Carolina. And the main theme, he stayed on point, and he wasn't really being distracted as sometimes he does, and then they get that little gaffe where he's maybe started to riff a little bit too much, and a comedy Trump routine comes out.
Shecky Trump.
Yeah, because he plays off the crowd, right? When he says something and the crowd roars, he's like, "Oh, you like that, do you?" And then he goes down these little tangents. It's good fun.
They're
Mate,
a lot of fun.
Donald Trump is better than most Netflix comedy shows. I will.
Well,
but what he did do really well is he stayed on point with the economy, and all these new stats came out about people entering the workforce for the first time, and for the first time ever, the percentage, I think it was between 25 and 40, were minorities.
Yeah.
And so there's a very positive story to tell.
This is really, really important, too, because a lot of the Democrat strategy relies on heavily African-American urban areas voting Democrat and then bringing those states like Illinois over with them just on the strength of those booths in the urban inner city areas. If the economy starts to change and there's less of a story for Democrats to tell, then if that even starts to break by 5-10% his way, that's a huge game changer for big states that you would often think no way a Republican will ever win, whether it's Donald Trump or anybody else. But you mentioned comedy shows.
Yep.
You mentioned comedy shows. Well, we got another one coming up. Houston, Friday. It's going to be, open mic night.
The 10 jesters.
Yeah. At the next Democrat debate. Now, the interesting thing here, a couple of things, is that it's been winnowed now down to 10 candidates here. The couple of other things about that. So, number one, people like Tulsi Gabbard, who were, for my mind...
We like Tulsi.
We love Tulsi. We're Team Tulsi. In fact, we have Team Tulsi bobblehead.
We're openly biased
we
for Tulsi.
love Tulsi.
Yeah.
She's one of the most sane people in the Democratic Party, which of course means that they won't give her any airtime. The other thing, though, that is really, really interesting is that we are now going to finally see, and now looking back on it, you can almost see how the producers have sort of set these things up so that you've got a series of heats, and now we've got dun dun dun, Sleepy Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren are going to be up on the end. Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders will be there too.
Oh, it's the first time that Warren and
yeah. So like and we'll talk about the polls in a second, but.
Well, but this is massive because, as you pointed out last week, she gets a bit of a free ride when Biden's the front runner, and she gets to coast in at number 2 and say all these ludicrous things. Now she's popped ahead of him in the polls. I think she's still ahead.
So Biden is still ahead, but Warren has been coming up. So we are now at 29.7 for Biden still, 18 for Warren, 17.5 for Sanders.
I've seen her, I don't have it in front of me. I think I have seen some polls put her just ahead.
Well,
I'm happy to be corrected in the comments.
Well, what's happening? That's everybody go and send Jack nasty emails. But the thing is that Warren has also reportedly this week been having a lot of discussions with a certain Hillary Clinton.
She's back, mate. She's predicted back. She would rise from the dead.
Well, so what's really interesting is that Warren is, to me, she's kind of like the somewhat more likable, less corrupt, less scary, less horrible Hillary Clinton. And I think she's sort of going for that.
The left are trying to paint her as look, they're saying, she's overwhelmingly charismatic, and yeah, she's charismatic compared to Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, which is a pretty low bar.
It's not difficult. This hat's more charismatic than Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, look, it's a red hat that scares a lot of people. We talked about that last week. But so this is going to be really interesting because I think that everybody is going to be watching Joe Biden. And if Joe Biden has a slip up here, any sort of thing that suggests a memory problem, a cognitive problem, or even just sort of general unwokeness, because, of course, the Democratic left is so woke, and we're talking about that when we talk about the climate town hall that they had.
I think he's got to try and curb the wokeness, I think he's got to try and go with the moderates.
The thing is that I think the traditional thing, though, in all politics, both sides, but especially with the Democrats right now, is you got to run very far to the outside to get the nomination.
And then pivot, and then run back to the...
And then, do the handbrake turn, and, spin the wheel around, and steer into the skid, and then race as hard back to the center as possible. It's like a Sydney to Hobart, it's like the opening there, you got,
you've got to drive to socialism, and then you've got to flirt with capitalism.
Exactly. So Elizabeth Warren is, of course, very high off the charts on the woke meter, wants to forgive student debts, total climate change person, ban everything, and all of this.
But my thing's like, why would you try and fight her on that? You're not going to outwoke Elizabeth Warren. You're not going to outwoke Bernie Sanders.
I mean, but the thing is, so Biden's problem is that he doesn't really have a rationale for being president. It's like, well, I was the vice president, and so therefore, I'm the next guy in line for the promotion. But I mean, like, it doesn't work that way in politics. It doesn't work that way, anywhere. That well, because I was the number 2, then necessarily you're going to be the number 1. It's 2 different jobs. And the fact is that, Biden just nobody. The American public has been exposed to Joe Biden for a good 40 years now. Plus, the American public has never clamored to see Joe Biden, in the White House. There's just no rationale for that. Everybody thinks, he's a nice guy, and everything like that. But the thing is that there's no leadership there. There's no vision. He's great.
Yeah, but also he had 8 years in a leadership position in an administration which was able to. For some parts they had the power to write legislation and pass it through. And a lot of these things that he has issues with and he's taken up as the fight, he didn't take up a fight when he had the power to do so.
Exactly. Well, I mean, to the extent that he had power as vice president. But the other thing too is that
it's very tokenistic kind of title, isn't it? But it's still a leadership position. And it's hard to it's hard to slam the Trump administration.
It's very much like what the show Veep is about. But also at the same time, it's also a thing where Barack Obama, his old boss, hasn't come out and said, Joe served under me for 8 years, and I think he's the man. Barack Obama has kept his powder dry. I think that sort of lack of an endorsement is pretty telling. pretty
Do you think we're going to see
telling.
him come out a little bit closer? Because what are we like? We're like 8 or 9 months away. What is it, July or something, when this gets decided? Do you think eventually we're going to see him pick a candidate when it gets chipped away and people drop out, or do you? What tends to happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a question of whether or not that sort of endorsement can actually hurt as much as help, particularly, against...
surely Obama's would help, say, whereas Bill Clinton's or Hillary's might hinder.
Well, I think, it depends on who you are and depends
Right.
on what frame you're looking at. If you're looking at swing voters and things, maybe, Barack Obama coming out and saying, vote, Elizabeth Warren or vote Joe Biden will help. But I think that he's going to keep his powder dry fairly long in the piece here. But my real sense here is that Elizabeth Warren winds up coming through. I think that Joe Biden will continue to lose momentum simply because he's the support for him is soft. There's no one is enthusiastic about Biden. People say Biden is a safe pair of hands just to kind of keep things going, but he's not the guy. And I think his moment was in 2016. But he had a lot of family stuff, a lot of weird stuff happening. He couldn't run back then. His moment was then. It's not now. Had the nominee been Joe Biden rather than Hillary Clinton in 2016, I suspect Joe Biden would have won as sort of the calming down president sort of thing. Whether or not he'd be a good president or not, I don't know. I don't think he would have been. I don't think he really quite gets it. And, if he was president right now, we'd be seeing some of the issues that we've been seeing around questions of his cognitive abilities and so on, and whether or not he's experiencing a bit of a sort of an age-related slowdown on that.
Yep.
So yeah.
So should we take a bet on who we think's going to walk away with the highest approval rating post-debate? Who would you have your money on?
Look, if it's going to be who's going to win the debate...
Well, who's going to... You know how they do that vote before, and they say, have we changed your mind, like a Stephen Crowder style?
So this is where... So what this is, I mean, I don't know about change my mind, but, because I know where my mind is. But I will say this. This is where Elizabeth Warren really, it's very high-stakes poker for her.
Yep.
This is her chance to bust through. So she needs to figure out a way to neutralize on her. So she's actually got an advantage here because, Bernie Sanders, the old socialist, communist guy from New Hampshire, is going to be there, and I know everybody likes it when we talk like Bernie. He's going to be there to the left, and so she can, even though she is herself really, really, really out there.
I really hope that they start duking it off.
Yeah, well,
because he's always like he's like welfare for all, and she's like welfare for the world.
Yeah, it's gonna be like the second Soviet Party Congress. It's gonna be the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks all over again. But I
wonder what time this streams for us here. So I'm gonna have to watch.
It'll be midday, probably midday. So on Friday, then it'll be Saturday here.
I just love watching Twitter react.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. So she has to do two things. She has to put away Bernie Sanders. Now, the advantage for Warren, though, is that because she's got this person so far to her left, which is, so far to the left of the fish fork, it's not even funny, she can then make herself seem moderate, and then she also needs to make herself seem competent compared to Joe Biden. Again, I don't think that's a heavy lift, but she needs to put Joe Biden away in an elegant sort of fashion. If she comes out of this, then you might start to see people moving her from their second choice candidate to their first candidate because, let's think about who else we've got. You got Sanders, you got Kamala Harris. Now, Kamala Harris is such a weak candidate. She's never caught fire. Her stuff about her career as a prosecutor has been terrible.
Her prosecutorial record, it's at odds with the way in which she's running.
And then everybody else is down below 5%, and I just don't see how Buttigieg or and Pete Buttigieg, like his stuff is really weird. This week he was out there giving his own interpretation of the Bible to use it to no, seriously, Jack, this was crazy. He was out there.
Our producer, loves Buttigieg.
Well, sorry, Tanya, but Buttigieg went on the radio and said that actually there's a way to read the Bible to and he said this to justify a late term abortion.
Yeah.
And everybody was like, really? Okay, so maybe he doesn't play theologian so much. Then you've got Yang, who's funny and interesting and crowd surfs, and he's this cool kind of Chinese tech dude. He's cool, but he's a 2.7. Cory Booker,
he's a smart guy, but
he's a very smart guy.
I got to say,
he's
he sounds like a con artist.
But I think he's a bit of a, and I think
he's just like selling. He's
yeah.
Selling.
He's an interesting guy. I'd love to have a beer with him. I think it'd be a lot of fun to. Yang would be a lot of fun if you were stuck in an airport for 3 hours and your flight got delayed and you were sitting at the bar at the airport. Have some beers with them. That'd be a lot of fun.
He also thinks that he knows a better way of doing everything in terms of our economic systems, and I think be very wary of people that reject the entire mechanism.
And a lot of his stuff also sort of sounds like college dorm room kind of stuff.
Man,
like
I smoked a joint and now I've fixed global hunger.
What if we did this, man? Wow, what if we all had a universal basic income, man? Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Before we go too far with the Warren-Clinton talk, what advice do you think that Clinton would have given Elizabeth Warren?
Oh, God. I mean, I don't know what Clinton would have... maybe don't marry a guy like Bill? But I
don't pressure women into silence.
Yeah. So I think it'd be pretty strategic, tactical kind of stuff. Machine organization stuff. But I mean, if
she's
Elizabeth
a master
Warren,
at that. Because her strategy post-election was, well, you all got it wrong. So master tactician.
Yeah. So, but to just go through, then Cory Booker is at 2.5%. Everybody's forgotten about him. Beto O'Rourke, the great media darling. Robert Francis O'Rourke.
Yeah.
Beto, man, dude, skateboarding. Yeah. Hey,
he also can barely skateboard, which is hilarious. Because he gets on and he's kind of like
those videos of the skateboarding bulldog that skateboards. He's a much more competent skateboarder, that English bulldog. And then Tulsi Gabbard, who we love, but she's at 1.7%. And then who are these other people? I mean, I love that. Bill de Blasio, the mayor of my old hometown, New York City, where I'll be next week, is down at 0.6%. Absolutely no one
thank you for him.
Well, well,
thanks, mate.
I didn't vote for him. I was, I've been gone for a long time. But so, they're all going to go. So it's really shaping up to be, a Biden, Warren, Sanders, probably three-way race, maybe with a bit of Harris hanging on.
Hey, can we talk about climate change?
No, do we have to?
Oh, we do, because they've been talking about it.
No, Jack,
we have to.
I
think we've
fine.
Even got some grabs.
All right, so hang on. So this was you're referring to and I mean, listeners, please don't tune out because these words are going to sound horrible to you. 7-hour marathon climate change.
7 hours of climate change.
It was enough. It was so bad. I mean, it's the sort of thing that would make you start bleeding from your eyeballs, which in fact happened to Joe Biden while he was in the middle of giving an answer, and his left eye filled up with blood, which of course everybody was like, what the hell just happened here? But then they thought, that's probably not an unreasonable reaction.
So can we go through some of the suggestions to saving the planet?
Let's actually, I think we've got...
One of them was, let me just go through this. Is kind of funny. We've got offshore drilling. Well, that was one of them. Ban it. Introducing a carbon tax. We know how that happened in Australia, and that worked terribly. And then we've even got the brilliant suggestion from Kamala Harris of banning plastic straws.
Yeah, and people would take Kamala Harris pretty seriously on that because, I mean, she was prepared to send a guy to the chair even when there was exculpatory evidence. So, I mean, if you were using a plastic straw, I think she'd, be up against the wall for you,
She's full on, but I think we've got some grabs.
Let's let everybody at home enjoy some of the madness.
Guidelines. The food pyramid. But people to reduce red meat specifically.
Yes, I would.
Do you ban plastic straws?
I think we should. Yes.
So would you ban offshore drilling?
Yes.
Just today, the Trump administration announced plans to overturn requirements on energy-saving light bulbs. Would you reinstate those requirements as president?
If you can get electricity from a light bulb that utilizes 1/10 of the power that an old incandescent light bulb used, of course you're going to do that.
We have to take combustion engine vehicles off the road as rapidly as we can.
Educating everyone on the need to curb population growth seems a reasonable campaign to enact. Would you be courageous enough to discuss this issue and make it a key feature of a plan to address climate catastrophe?
Well, Martha, the answer is yes. I think especially in poor countries around the world where women do not necessarily want to have large numbers of babies, and where they can have the opportunity through birth control to control the number of kids they have, something I very, very strongly support.
Let's talk about offshore drilling for oil. Would you ban it?
Yes.
Would you ban offshore drilling?
Absolutely yes. We will transition off of fossil fuels, natural gas, coal, oil.
What about the export of fossil fuels from the United States? Would you ban that?
Absolutely, we must get to that point.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
I'm in favor of a carbon-free America.
In my administration, we're not going to build any new nuclear power plant.
Wow, did you hear all that stuff? So let's go through the list. What's banned now under the Democrats? Red meat?
No.
Banned. Okay. Light bulbs? We're all sitting in the dark. Plastic straws? No, you got to drink out of the cup. Your car? That's
Why do they
banned.
always try and
hang on. Offshore drilling? Children in poor countries? Everything banned.
Why red meat? Look, I'm a steak guy, and like
you're killing the planet, Jack, you bastard.
But let's think about the theory behind this, right? You don't want steak because of the methane that carbon-based life produces, essentially.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's a war against carbon-based life in itself.
Well, obviously, Jack.
What's the solution? They would have to kill all the cattle that would be killed anyway for it to reduce that methane. Because if you just don't eat them, they're still going to be producing methane.
Clearly,
in a way, every steak I eat is cutting down on methane producing cattle.
Look. I think it's as
Solving
a great chef once said,
one porterhouse at a time.
Butter is just grass reflected through a cow. I don't understand what all these vegans are all about. But seriously, if the idea is we need to fight methane emissions, so stop eating steak, start eating beans. I'm not quite sure how that works. Anyway, it was pretty crazy stuff. You want to hear crazy? I want to go, Jack. We've got a great Wokely of the week, wokest moment of the week.
The Wokely.
Can you give us a little setup to this? What do we got?
Well, we don't want to call anybody guys because we don't want to be, gendering anybody. So let's hear this brilliant argument put forward by now.
So this is we can't say the word guys anymore.
Well, apparently.
Okay, well let's hear it.
Guys is a simple term. It could mean boys, or if you're modern, hip, it means people. At first glance, guys seems inviting, friendly, maybe warm, even comedic at times. But it, like many male default terms, should not be normalized as an all-encompassing phrase, innocent as it may seem. While we may understand the word means no real harm, with a deeper look, you'll understand that we've been ignoring the cognitive impact on women as well as gender non-conforming folks by only explicitly addressing the male-identifying individuals present.
Well, I can't beat that. Can you beat that, Jack? That's
the cognitive damage you're doing to somebody by using the word guys.
Yeah, so, I mean, look, if this is your biggest worry in the world, then I'd say you don't have a lot of problems. Well, guys out there, I think all of you guys. I thank you guys for.
Thanks, guys, for tuning in.
And we're gonna be on a little break while I'm off in the States, and we'll come back soon with more from this fantastic race. I'd like to thank my favorite guy, Jack Houghton here.
Thanks, Guy.
Thanks, Guy.
Cheers.
All right, thank you, guys.
Cheers, fellas.
See you on the next Race to 2020.